Hey there, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that, well, many of us know is important, but maybe don't fully grasp beyond the headlines: smoking. We're diving into the complexities, not just that it's bad, but how it really damages your body. And also the surprising stuff about some alternatives, the actual science of addiction, and importantly, real strategies for quitting.
It's definitely a critical discussion, especially when you think about all the information and misinformation that's out there. Our goal today is really to cut through that noise using the insights from the sources you've shared. We want to give you clear, actionable knowledge about what's still, one of the biggest preventable health risks we face.
Exactly. You might think, yeah, smoking's bad, I get it. But trust us, we found some genuinely eye-opening things in this material. Stuff that goes way beyond the usual warnings. So whether you smoke and are thinking about quitting, or maybe you're supporting someone who is, or you're just curious about health, stick around. Okay, let's unpack this. We all know smoking isn't good for us, obviously. But the sources really spell out just how comprehensive the damage is. It's insidious. It goes so far beyond just your lung. We're talking accelerated age, like wrinkles, yeah, but other tissues too. Destruction of collagen, which is vital, a real negative impact on hormones, which affects, well, everything: mood, energy, and it mentions worsening libido, reduced sexual performance for both men and women.
And what's fascinating, or maybe alarming, is how the source emphasizes cardiovascular health. It actually states quitting smoking is the single most important step for cardiovascular prevention.
Yeah.
More important even than exercise and diet. Think about that.
Wow, more than exercise and diet. That's
Yeah.
huge.
Okay.
That's
It is. It really highlights how systemic the damage is. It's not just one organ. For instance, it significantly impairs cognitive function. Why? Because it harms blood vessels everywhere, including your brain. And of course, it drastically increases your risk of cancer, many types of cancer.
okay. So that cardiovascular damage, you said it's key. Let's dig into that a bit more.
Right. So smoking hits your cardiovascular system in several ways. Let's break it down. First, arterial hardening. It makes your arteries stiffen up. They can't dilate properly, which messes with blood pressure.
Okay, stiff arteries. Got it.
Second, inflammation. Smoking triggers inflammation basically everywhere in your body. This makes it much easier for cholesterol deposits to stick to your artery walls.
Like making the wall sticky for bad stuff.
Kinda, yeah. Third, fat oxidation. Smoking actually oxidizes fats circulating in your blood. This raises your LDL, that's the bad cholesterol, and lowers your HDL, the good cholesterol. So double negative there.
Not good.
Fourth, sympathetic stimulation. Now this is interesting. Many people smoke to relax, right? But nicotine is actually a stimulant. It speeds up your brain, activates your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight system. This directly contributes to high blood pressure, or makes existing hypertension worse. Always.
Huh. So the feeling of relaxation is misleading.
Very much so, chemically speaking. And fifth, crucially, endothelial damage. Smoking chemically damages the endothelium. That's the superdelicate inner lining of your arteries. Once that lining is damaged, it becomes a prime spot for cholesterol, calcium, fibrous tissue, basically plaque, to build up. This speeds up atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of the arteries.
So let me get this straight. High blood pressure can damage arteries through, like, physical force.
Right, mechanical stress.
But smoking is like a direct chemical attack on that lining, giving cholesterol an easy way in.
That's a great way to put it. It's a direct chemical assault. So the takeaway for you listening is crystal clear. Avoiding both smoking and high blood pressure is just critical for preventing heart disease, strokes, all of it. And quitting smoking, the single most impactful thing you can do based on these sources.
Okay, so knowing all that about traditional cigarettes, it naturally makes you wonder about the alternatives. And this is where it gets really interesting, maybe even a bit confusing, because the picture isn't nearly as clear-cut as, well, as marketing might suggest, especially with things like cannabis.
You're right, it gets murky. According to the sources, the honest answer about smoking cannabis is, we don't have enough solid long-term data, specifically on its effects on blood vessels and cardiovascular health. We just don't know for sure. But, and this is a big but, we have zero reason to believe it's less harmful, puff for puff, than smoking non-industrial tobacco.
Okay, no reason to think it's safer per se. But there was a point about quantity, wasn't there?
Yes, exactly. That's the nuance. While the damage per dose might be comparable, we don't know for sure. People who smoke cannabis typically consume far less material. The sources say tens of times less than someone smoking, say, a pack of 20 tobacco cigarettes a day. So just by sheer volume inhaled, the total damage might be less for a typical cannabis user versus a heavy cigarette smoker. But the advice remains the same. It's best not to smoke either one. Inhaling burnt stuff isn't good for your lungs or heart, period.
Right. Avoid the smoke altogether if possible. So what about vaping? E-cigarettes. They're often pushed as much safer, right?
Right.
A quitting tool, even.
Yes, vaping. This raises a really important point and maybe one of those uncomfortable truths. The sources are pretty clear. Vaping is not harmless, not like we might want it to be. There's a specific condition called vape-associated lung injury, or VLI. It's documented. Think about your lungs. They have this massive internal surface area like a tennis court, apparently designed for swapping gases, oxygen, and CO2.
Wow, a tennis court.
Yeah, huge surface area. So when you inhale anything, tiny pollution particles, or the aerosols from vapes with all their chemicals and flavorings, that massive surface just absorbs it straight into your system. Putting anything other than clean air in there carries risks. And the evidence is building that vaping is definitely no exception. We might not know all the long-term effects yet, but the short-term ones are concerning.
And quitting vaping. The data on that isn't great either, is it?
No, it's actually quite stark. The evidence we have so far suggests that for most people, quitting vaping is more difficult than quitting traditional cigarettes.
Really? More difficult.
It seems so. Think about the cigarette quitting stats. Only about 5% manage it on their own. And of those, something like 65% relapse within a year. Pretty tough odds. The numbers for vaping cessation are still emerging, but they look even worse. Lower success rates. It just brings us back to that core message. Avoid starting either if you can. And if you have started, the goal should be to stop completely. That's the safest path.
Okay, so given all these harms, and the fact that even the alternatives are problematic and hard to quit, why? Why is it so incredibly difficult to stop smoking or vaping? The sources really get into the weeds on addiction science here, and it's more than just nicotine, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just nicotine, although nicotine is definitely a key player. Addiction to tobacco or vaping products is really multifaceted.
Yeah.
You've got the chemical addiction to nicotine itself, which is powerful. But then there's the whole behavioral habit, bringing something to your mouth, the inhale, the exhale. That ritual is deeply ingrained. Our lips and mouth are incredibly sensitive, right? They give us a lot of tactile feedback. Think about babies exploring everything with their mouths. It's a fundamental thing, and that contributes to the habitual side of smoking.
So it's the chemical hit and the physical act, the ritual itself. That's a tough combination.
Exactly. And if we zoom out a bit, all addictive behavior, smoking, alcohol, gambling, maybe even, constantly checking your phone, they work by hijacking your brain's reward system, specifically neurotransmitters like dopamine. These substances or behaviors cause an unnaturally large surge of dopamine, a big reward signal. Over time, your brain tries to adapt to this constant overstimulation. It responds by downregulating its own dopamine receptors. It basically turns down its sensitivity.
So you need more and more just to feel normal, let alone get that initial buzz?
Precisely. You need a bigger dose or more frequent use just to get close to the same effect. That's tolerance. And it's a vicious cycle. But it gets worse. This dopamine dysregulation doesn't just make you crave the substance more, it also makes other normal life pleasures feel kind of flat, less motivating.
Wow, so it literally dulls the rest of your life.
It can, yeah. It makes it harder to find motivation and enjoyment in everyday things. Understanding this whole dopamine trap is absolutely central to figuring out how to quit effectively, because the goal when breaking an addiction isn't just willpower. It's about trying to stabilize those neurotransmitters, smooth out the withdrawal, make it manageable.
Okay, that makes sense. If the addiction messes with brain chemistry and habits so much, what can you actually do? How do you break free? The sources offered some really concrete strategies, starting with figuring out where you stand, dependence-wise.
Yes, that self-assessment is a really useful starting point. It involves asking some direct questions, like, how soon after waking up do you have your first cigarette or vape? Within 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. Is it difficult not to smoke in places where it's banned? Which cigarette of the day would be the absolute hardest one to give up? Usually the first one, but not always. How many do you smoke per day? More than 20, less than 10. Do you smoke more heavily in the morning hours? And do you even smoke when you're sick enough to be in bed most of the day? Answering those honestly gives you, and potentially a doctor, a good sense of your level of physical dependence, which helps tailor the right approach.
Right, knowing your enemy, so to speak. Once you have that baseline, what are the most effective tools the sources highlighted?
Okay, so the evidence points strongly towards several key strategies, and often combining them is best. First, there's bupropion. You might know it as an antidepressant, but it also helps significantly with quitting smoking. It works partly by boosting dopamine and norepinephrine levels slightly, which helps counter that dopamine dip during withdrawal, reducing cravings. The typical dose mentioned is 300 milligrams a day, split into 250 milligram doses. Studies show it can basically double the success rate compared to a placebo, maybe around 20% success. And the advice is usually to start taking it about a week before your quit date to let those levels stabilize.
Okay, bupropion. Start before you quit. What else?
Second, nicotine replacement therapies, or NRTs. This is your patches, gums, lozenges, inhalers, nasal sprays. The real advantage here is they let you tackle the chemical addiction separately from the behavioral habit. You get a steady, controlled dose of nicotine, which reduces the physical withdrawal symptoms, the cravings, the irritability. This frees you up to focus on breaking the actual habit of smoking or vaping. Then, you can gradually taper down the NRT dose over weeks or months, allowing your brain's receptors to slowly readjust. It works for quitting both cigarettes and vapes.
Separating the chemical from the habit?
Right.
Smart. Are there other medications?
Yes. Varenicline is another key one. It works a bit differently. It partially stimulates the nicotine receptors in the brain, so it gives a little bit of nicotine-like effect to ease cravings, but it also blocks actual nicotine from binding fully if you do smoke, making smoking less rewarding. And there's cytosine, which is an alkaloid, works similarly to varenicline. Often its dose is increased as someone cuts down on cigarettes.
Okay, so several medication options, and you mentioned combining them.
Absolutely. The sources suggest that combination therapy is often the most effective strategy. So maybe varenicline plus an NRT patch, or bupropion plus nicotine gum, and maybe a patch too, using multiple tools to hit the addiction from different angles. Though a word of caution, if you have existing heart conditions, you definitely need to do this under medical supervision, as combining things needs careful thought.
Right, always consult a doctor. What about less conventional things? Hypnosis, supplements.
Yeah, these sources touched on those too. Some strategies have less robust evidence but might still offer support. Certain types of hypnosis, particularly ones studied formally at universities, actually showed success rates over 20%, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of supplements, things like L-tyrosine, maybe about a gram a day, and mucunapurines might offer a little help. They provide the raw materials your brain uses to make dopamine, so it could slightly support those pathways.
Yeah.
And, critically important, stress management, since so many people smoke or vape partly due to stress.
Right, the trigger.
Exactly. Learning to manage stress through other means, mindfulness, exercise, therapy, whatever works for you, can remove a major trigger for relapse. These might not be the magic bullet for quitting initially, but they can be invaluable for staying quit long term. So the bottom line really is combine strategies, medication, NRT, behavioral support, stress management, personal resolve. Use everything available to stack the odds in your favor.
So there you have it, a pretty deep dive into the real costs of smoking, some surprising truths about the alternatives, that tricky dopamine science behind addiction, and importantly, a whole toolkit of proven strategies to help break free. We really hope you feel more informed and maybe more empowered after exploring all this with us.
Yeah, the big message here, I think, is that quitting is possible. There are effective ways to do it. And just understanding why it's harmful and why it's so hard to quit can actually be a really powerful first step. Your health is definitely a long game, right? And taking steps to remove a risk like smoking, that's a huge win every time.
Absolutely. And here's maybe a final thought to noodle on based on what we discussed. If that mouthfeel, the tactile sensation, the ritual plays such a big part in the smoking habit, how might you consciously use other sensory experiences or create new, healthier rituals during the quitting process to help replace that powerful oral fixation? Just something to think about as you move towards a healthier future. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.